Welcome to John Adams' Presidency, a study guide. Very shortly after the incident with France, the Federalists decided to pass something called the Alien Act. And an alien is someone who is in an unfamiliar or a foreign environment. It does not necessarily mean little green men who came from outer space. It just means that you're in a foreign or an alien environment. And people coming to a new country fit that description. The Alien Act was passed by the Federalists in 1798. It allowed the president to expel or kick out any alien or foreign immigrant who he thought posed a danger to the country. He didn't have to prove they had done anything. He just had to think that they were a danger, and he could kick them out. That's not very American, is it? The Alien Act also increased from 7 years to 14 years the wait an immigrant had in order to apply for citizenship in America. Now, the High Federalist argued that this law was done to protect America from spies. But the reality was it was very politically motivated. Most of the immigrants at this time in history were coming from France. They tended to join the Democratic-Republican Party when they became citizens. So by extending the time before they could be citizens, the Federalists were keeping them from voting in elections for a much longer period of time. They hoped that the Federalists would be able to retain control of the federal government. At about the same time that they passed the Alien Act, Congress also passed what was called the Sedition Act. Now, sedition is the act of stirring up a rebellion against a country or a nation. The Sedition Act was also passed by the Federalists in 1798, and it made it a crime to speak or write any untrue criticism of the United States, its government, or government officials. The Democratic Republicans, intelligently, argued that the Sedition Act violated the First Amendment right to free speech. Many newspapermen, congressmen were thrown in jail for speaking out against elected officials under the Sedition Act. Problem was, not all of those that were speaking out were saying untruths. Many of them were actually telling the truth. Nullification. Thomas Jefferson believed that the Alien and Sedition Acts would lead to an end to democracy, and he did not believe that the Federalist-controlled Supreme Court would declare that these acts were unconstitutional. Jefferson did believe, however, that states had the right to nullify or ignore or refuse to enforce federal laws. The Kentucky and Virginia resolutions were passed saying that states could nullify laws within their own borders. Basically pick and choose what federal laws they were going to follow and what ones they weren't in their own states. Their argument was that states had an equal right to determine the constitutionality of laws, and if they felt they were unconstitutional, they could nullify them, just simply choose not to enforce them. The nullification issue would continue to be a problem for America for many years, and it definitely was not solved during John Adams' presidency. As one of his last acts as a lame duck president, that's a president who has not won the next election and is simply in that period between the election and leaving office. We call them a lame duck because they basically have limited power since people know they're not going to be in office for very long. As a lame duck president, John Adams packed the courts with Federalist judges. Now, judges were lifetime appointments, and so by packing the courts with Federalist judges, he hoped that the Federalists would retain control of the government. Adams also appointed John Marshall to serve as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. John Marshall had been one of his cabinet officers. It was left to James Madison, the incoming Secretary of State, to see that all of the appointment documents were delivered to these judges once Thomas Jefferson was sworn in as the new president. However, that didn't happen, and I'll tell you more about that as we discuss Jefferson's presidency. And there you have some of the key important events that occurred during John Adams' time as President of the United States.